Hello everyone, welcome to my second part of Nextjs tutorial. In this part, we're gonna integrate the Github API and evolve our application further. But before we do this, I want to fix a mistake that I did in previous part. If you want to get this code from part 1, please have a look in the description of the video. There you will find a link to the code of the current lesson and also all the previous lessons. If you have the code from the part 1, here in index.js we need to find a function getStaticProps, and this function is actually not what we wanted because in previous part we discussed server-side rendering. But if you go to the documentation of Nextjs, you will find out here in data fetching, you will find out that getStaticProps is the hook exactly for static site generation. That is executed to fetch data at the build time. And that's not what we wanted, because we discussed server-side rendering that is executed on the server with every request. To make a server-side rendering, you actually need to use a different name, getServerSideProps, not getStaticProps. We saw no difference just because we used our next in development mode, so it actually behaves the same in dev mode, but in the production we probably have a problem with this approach. But if we already spoke about static site generation, I want to show you how to use Nextjs as a static site generator. Before we do this, let's have a look at such a thing which called Jamstack. Jamstack is an approach of building applications that usually is deployed on the static site hosting. They are serverless, they use serverless functions, and they use something like headless CMS for the data, and of course you need one of the static site generator. Here we can find a list of static site generator. For example, Gatsby is a very popular one, also built with React. You also see here Next that can be used as a static site generator, also Jekyll, Hugo, and Next. So if you're interested in this, please search for the Jamstack. But I will briefly show us how to use this in Nextjs. So we already have this getStaticProps. So it means this should be executed at build time. To do this, we need to go to the package.json and add one more script, for example, export. And here we need to do two things. We need to make next build and next export. Next export will create a folder with static files. You will see it now. Let's make yarn export. You will see that after build, here will appear an out folder like this. I already have this, but it should appear if you don't have it. And there you will find all the static files. Like, see, it's rendered now. You find here like static HTML. And if you want to see our joke, which should be fetched at the build time once and embedded into our HTML, we need to open this in the file explorer, open the index.html, and you'll see that a static HTML that has our joke here. And if you refresh, of course, nothing changed because it's inside HTML. So this is a static page in the end. And these static pages, you don't need a server, you just need to deploy it in any static hosting. Like a lot of static hosting is right now, like Firebase, also Netlify, and many others, also now Sage and more. So you can take advantage of this approach if you want. What also is important that if we have a look at our build log here in the console, you'll find that it's a very cool log actually. Here you see that all the pages we have about page, we have app, which is the main page, and the index page, which is the default page. An index page has this icon, which is a solid dot. And here we see the legend, this icon means. It means, the solid dot means SSG, which is static site generated page. So because we used getStaticProps. But if we change this to getServerSideProps, in previous version it was getInitialProps, it will be a page that is used in the server-side rendering. So for this page you need a server. So if you use get server-side props for server-side rendering, and then you try to make next export, you will have an error, of course. When we change our page to get server-side props, here, and run the build again, for example, in the build log, you will see that our page changed the icon to the lambda icon because I used get server-side props, and now this page is using server-side rendering. Let's have a look at this. Yes, we can see the lambda icon here. It means the index page is using server-side rendering now. Okay, now let's forget about this and continue building our application. So in this part, we want to integrate GitHub API. And how to do this? Let's first of all go to the GitHub API. Let's close this. GitHub API documentation. This is the GitHub API documentation. And here we can find that if you use GitHub API without authentication, you will have a rate limit. And this is very important because in development, you will have a lot of requests actually while you're developing and when you reload your application. But it's so easy to exceed this quota of requests. It's very easy. It's only 10 requests per minute. That's why you for sure need to authenticate. But how to authenticate? We will create a token in GitHub that we will use as a basic auth. We will provide our token and client ID. So to do this, you need to have, of course, a GitHub account that you probably have. If you don't, that's a good time to do this. Then we go to the settings and to the developer settings. And in developer settings, you will have OAuth apps. You click here, and then you need to create a new application. What I will do now, I will create a new app. For example, let's call it GitHub Nextjs Part 2. Probably I already have something like this. Let's first of all, I remove this one. Let's remove it. Okay. Then go to the OAuth app again, create a new app. I'll call this like this. In the homepage URL, just put localhost 3000. It's not important. Then register application. After that, you will have client ID and client secret. That's what we need to pass as a basic auth with every request that we do to the GitHub API. So how to use this? I actually already created this file, but let's create this again. To do this, we need to put our secrets as environment variables, so they are secured. Let's create a file which is called .env.local. Here we'll put our secrets. This file, usually by default, is in gitignore. Because it must be in gitignore, you don't need to commit your secrets to the repo. So let's put here two environment variables. GitHub client ID, which is equal to this value, client ID, and GitHub client token, I guess, or client secret. Let's make it client secret, and put this value here. The Nextjs has a built-in support for .env. It means when you start the server, it will inject your properties into memory, so you will have your environment variable access in your application by default. Before, it was not possible. You had to export the environment variables you want in the next config, but now it's a cool feature that is supported by default. So to use this, we will create a new folder in src. Let's call it services. And we will create a new file, github service.js. Here we will make a request, so we need to import Axios. And we will use the Axios config because we will need to authenticate. So let's create a constant Axios config. Here we will need a base URL. And what is our base URL? Let's go to this documentation that I showed you. It's Github API, REST API version 3. It's available by this developer.github API version 3. You can find here, for example, what we want to do. We want to search repos. Let's have a look again at our final application. This is our final application. And here we want to implement, in this part, I want to implement only repo search text input and language select. And of course it will return all the repos and we will be able to search exactly like this. So to do this, we need to search the repos. How to search the repos? Let's go to the documentation, and here you can find search repositories. And here scroll to the final, to the example. This is the example. Let's copy the example and see what it returns. It should return us an array of many repos based by the query. And the query here actually is a funny one. It's a Tetris and language assembly. But what is important for us, let's copy the base URL and put it here. The base URL is https://api.github.com. And here we need a second object, which is auth. And the object has two parameters actually, username, and our username is our environment variable. We access it by process.env.github client ID, and then password is also environment variable GitHub client secret. Let's see if I named it correct. Client secret and GitHub client ID. Okay, that looks correct. Then, with every request that we do to the GitHub API, we will pass this Axios config. Let's create our first request. It will be a function which is search repos. And it will accept two arguments, the search text and language. Sorry. Let's return an Axios get from here and copy the link. The link of the request is here until the search. Let's copy this, put it here. As a second argument, let's put comma and pass our Axios config. The request looks like this. But this always will search for Tetris and language assembly, not what we want. We want to use our search text and language from here. What I advise to do is to create a constant which is called query. And if we have a language, then we put a search text plus language and then language here. If we don't, let's just put a search text. Why I did this? I did this because if you don't have a language, so it's an example when we put the all version, which is I don't have a language, I want to see all languages. The language is an empty string or just a null value. And then if you put a null value here, you will have an error. So GitHub API will not accept this. So that's why if you don't have a language, you just put the search text. And this is our query. Now let's remove everything here in the query until sort and use it here as query. Now we need to change our string to template literal to accept the variable, and it's done. Now we can use our search repos service. Let's continue by building more components. What I will do here, I will not use any state management frameworks like Redux or Mobix, because this application is very small and I don't want to waste time on this. What I will do the very traditional way of React, is having all the state here in index page, in the main component, I would say, and pass all the state via props and all the function events also via props. So we'll pass it to the all nested components. Let's make a bit of cleanup. Remove everything in return. Also remove all this from here. Let's think what state we have. We have a state of our search text, first of all. Let's use state search text, which is by default an empty string. Also, let's use state for the language, which is the language select, also by default an empty string. Then in the end we will have a repos that we want to show. We also need a state for repos, which is by the end an empty array. And while repos are loading, we will have a loader, so we need a state for loading. By default, the loading is of course false. Yeah, so this is our state, and we will pass all this parameter to our main component. Let's first create a search component. This search component will contain these two fields here, repo search and language select. So we'll have a search component here. And let's implement this in the folder. Sorry, not a folder, just a file. Search.js. React arrow function component. If you're interested how I do this snippets for React, it's an extension called React Redux GraphQL React snippets, this extension, and then you can, with the snippets, create fast the components. What I will do, I usually make a React arrow function component export, which is RAFCE, and then you just press enter. It's a common, a very comfortable thing in my opinion. Usually use it when I create a lot of components. So this is our search component that will be shown in the index page, and here we'll have two inputs. We'll have a text input here and a select. What I don't want to do, I don't want to put the text input and select from HTML here, because usually you have a lot of inputs in your application and you want to create something like a small framework, small library to have the same exactly look and feel and also functionality for all your inputs in the whole your project. So that's why I suggest to create something like shared folder. Here we'll create our really basic components like select and text input. So let's do this. Let's create text input here. And another component, let's create a select.js. Again, I use the snippet for text input. So let's think what text input actually is. It should have, of course, an input inside. And this input will have a value and onChange, or maybe also something like the label or placeholder. Yeah. So we'll pass all these properties via props, and what we need something like label, value, and onChange function, and placeholder, I guess. So let's put the label here just for now, and value here, and also call an onChange function that will execute a function which is an event, and we'll call onChange from the props event that target that value. So we don't have we don't return an event, we will return the value from this component. And also we can pass the placeholder if it makes sense. Let's also pass the placeholder, I think, from the props. Let's move the label here because I did something a bit wrong. Yeah, that's exactly what we need for the input to work. And let's make something very similar. Copy this to the select. The only reason, sorry, it's not select, this is select. First of all, let's create a component, select, and put the props here. We'll also, oops, this is the bug from this extension. We have a label, we have the value, and we have onChange also, but we don't have a placeholder, we have an options, which is the list of the options. And let's put the label here first, and then a select. Inside select we have an options. Options should be an array of objects, as I think. So we will need to make a map to the options, options.map, and here we have the value, and every value returns an option. The option should have a key because of React. Let's put value, or no, not the value. Let's put this also option. Yes, option value can be used as a key. Also the value of the option, also here, option.value. And then in the option text, it will be something like option.label. So we have our select here that should have a value also. Let's put the value from the props and also onChange from the props. It's exactly the same what we did for this text input component. Event target.value. Okay, now we have select and text input components that are really reusable. You can use it in every select you want, and you just pass the options, you pass the onChange, the value. It can be reused. It's a shared component. I find this a very nice best practice. So let's use this. Where we want to use this? In the search we have text input and select. Let's first of all import them. Text input. Also import the search. Sorry. Something is wrong with this. Yeah, it doesn't work. Okay, let's make share it. Search. Yeah, but we need to provide all the props here. But from where we get these props? This search component also should have a props. What kind of props should have? It should have, let's put here the props and the structure it in the next line. It should have a language. It should have a search text. Also the functions on search text change and on language change. We structure it from the props. We have all this, but we also don't have an options. Let's put it const options here and create an array of options. We will do this a bit later because we will create a constant for the languages. Let's first of all use this. In text input, we need to have a label, which is repo search. Then, we need to have a value, which is just search text. We also need to have a onChange function, which is also a function value. It calls onSearch text change and pass here also the value. Then on the select we have also label, of course, which is language. Then we have a value of language from props, and we have also exactly the same onChange function. Let's just copy it, put it here, and change the event function, which is on language change, also from the props. And the only thing is left is options for the languages. So actually the languages. I actually would rename it to languages and use it here. So in the end, we used our shared components here, base components, text input, and select what we wanted. But for now, right now, this text input is the repo search, but it can be, of course, different any text input. Also, the same applies to select. It's now the dropdown for languages, but you can use it because it's a nice shared component for any dropdowns in your application. Let's fix the last thing, languages. First of all, let's create another folder in the src, which is the constants folder. And in constants, create a file, which is languages.constant.js. I will briefly copy paste this file. You can also pause the video and copy all this file. You don't need to put all the languages, but just I found these names for the languages in the GitHub API. But you can, of course, extend this or make it less as you want. So we have a constant, which is the languages constant. That's why I put it uppercase, because it's a constant. I found it a good notation. And here every constant has a label, and has a value. The value is what we send to the GitHub API, and the label what is shown. So actually, if you put something like that, for example, just C#, it will not work because GitHub will not accept this. It should be like that. So I spent some time finding this in GitHub API documentation. So let's use this languages constant in the search. We will spread this languages constant. Yeah, languages. And let's import this from languages constant, languages. Let's see if I exported this correct as a default. Okay, so I can use it like that. And using the spread operator, we'll put all the options in this array. But why we are using this? Because we want to add an extra option. Actually, extra option is the option for the all. Is this option. So like you don't specify any language, and this all option will have the value of empty string. Value is empty string and the label is all. That should be enough. We can use it here. And the last thing is left to connect our state that we put here with the search component. So let's do this final thing. Let's provide here as a prop our search text from the state, search text. Also language from the state. And also we will need to create some functions when the search text is changed and language is changed. On search text change, we will call also on search text change function, and on language is changed, we also call on language change function. But we don't have these functions. Let's create them now. So on search text change just receives the text and sets the search text here to our state. It also will load repos, of course, but let's now create another one on language change. And this also accepts the language and also sets the state. Language. At that point, we can put we can start our dev server and see how everything looks like. What is very important that you should see this info log here, which is loaded from env. It means our environment variables from here are loaded and everything works correct. So let's see. Let's open localhost 3000. Oh, sorry, I already opened it, but never mind. Let's a bit zoom in first, and then see what's the error. Search is not defined. That's because I forgot to import the search component. Let's import it first. That should fix the issue. Then here identifier search has already been declared. Okay, in this search component. Because here I imported this wrong. You need to have a select here, of course. Very nice. Now we can see the repo search text input, and we have language select drop down. Let's open this. We have all our languages from the constant, which is nice. And we, of course, can type anything, and it sets to the state. The last part, to connect our GitHub service that we created with our inputs. So it means we need to have a function here which loads repos and sets it also to the state. It's an async function that accepts the search text and language. When we start loading, we would like to set loading to true. And then we make a request using our service. And let's try to import this with this search text. No, it's wrong. Search repos. Yes. And let's import our GitHub service. Import search repos from GitHub service. Then we provide here the search text and language. And then we have a response. We set loading to false and set our repos to response.data.items. Now we have, after loading the repos, we will have our repos. We need to show it. Let's briefly, very fast show it here. Let's wait. Search repos is not exported from the GitHub service. Let's go into GitHub service. Okay, I forgot to export this. Search repos. Okay. So when we load the repos, we'll have it in the state. We need to show it. Let's first do this, something like if loading, then let's just show a text loading ... And if it's not loading, let's just show a div. And inside the div, let's put a JSON stringify repos from the state. Now that (2). Okay, let's see if this works. Let's refresh. By default, we have an empty array of repos, but if I start type React, it should fire the requests. Let's open the network and see what happens. React. No, this is because I didn't call the repos. I forgot to call the load repos, actually. It should be called here when I do search text change. I should also call it with a search text and language. What is very important here, if I use search text, it will not work because the state is not updated. The state should be updated after this, but it actually doesn't work like that in React. because the state actually will be updated after this function. So if we use search text from the state, it will have old search text, not the new one. So to make the current new change text, we need to use this variable from the arguments of a function. So let's change it to text. The language, of course, can stay because it's not changed in this function. The same idea also applies here. Let's also load repos when we change language and use search text from the state and language. Here I name it language just because it will take, of course, the closest variable, and in this case it will take the language from the function arguments. So we connected our text change events with load repos. Let's see how it works. Let's type React. We can see how many requests are fired here, and they actually work, but I think we can easily exceed our quota if we make a lot of requests. Yeah, something like this. But why? Why is this happening? It's happening because we implemented, let's also zoom in here if it's possible. I hope, yeah. Here, oh, okay, yeah, I did zoom in. If we open this request, any of them actually, we need to have a look and find a header, which is the auth header. Authorization here. And as we see, the basic and then only 4 letters. It actually means it should be a long hash here, which is the base64 encoded string. But it's such a small string because it actually didn't work. Our environment variables are undefined. We can also make it if we go to the GitHub search and try to lock our process.env GitHub client ID or secret, they will be undefined. They will not work. And why is this happening? This is because Nextjs by default protects us to exposing the environment variables or our secrets to the client side. But if you really want to do this and you want to inline them into build time, because of course process.env is undefined on client side, it's only for Node.js, so on the server. But if you still want to use it, there is a possibility how to use this, and also you can find this by just going to the Nextjs documentation and type here into the docs like environment variables. It's really well described how to do this. If you want to inline variables at the build time, you need to prefix them with next public. So let's copy this next public, go to our .env local and prefix both of them with next public underscore. Then we go to our GitHub service and also do exactly the same thing. Let's change it. And let's see if it's any effect after these changes. Let's refresh. Yeah, I think this is happening because we need to restart our server after we change the name of environment variables. Let's restart this and refresh. And now if the environment variables are correct, we will see a much longer basic auth token. Let's scroll. Yeah, this actually means it works. And if you change it, if you make a wrong, you will see also a 404 error because your client ID or your secret is wrong, so authorization didn't work. So if you're afraid that you did something wrong, you will see it as an error, so GitHub will not accept this. But in this case, everything is okay, and I can make a lot of requests and I will not exceed the quota. So it means it's done right, but actually it's not right because it means everyone can just copy our token, go to any base64 decode, something like this, put it here and decode. And of course here you can find our client ID, our token and client ID separated, concatenated with the column. I will leave it like this for now. In the next series, we will fix this and we move this request to the server using the API routes from Nextjs. It's a very cool feature, but for now let's just leave it. And also what I will fix in the in the next series, I will fix when we make a lot of requests, and if you type really fast, you will see that, let's clear this, you will see how this result is blinking, because all the requests returns a result and then they've replaced one by one. Like I'll show it right now. Like I type something and then it changed. And if you make a lot of requests, you will see how much it changes. This is not a good user experience, and what I would like to do when I type, there are two solutions actually. The first solution is when you stop typing, you start the request, but that a bit delays the result in my opinion. What also you can do when you type and with every new letter, the previous requests get cancelled. It's a nice experience in my opinion, and I will show you in the next part how to do this with Nextjs. So before we stop this, let's also check if the language select is working. Let's put TypeScript and see if we have a different result. Yes, we have a different result. It means this works. If we go to our request URL, we see that we search for React and the language is TypeScript from our languages constant, which is great. At this point, I would like to finish this part. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something new. Thank you very much for watching. Please put a like and subscribe and continue watching the next part. Bye bye.